Jatra literally means journey or procession. It is a popular and dynamic form of folk theatre prevalent across the eastern parts of India. Bengal, Odisha, Assam, Tripura, Bihar, as well as prevalent in Bangladesh. Jatra is characterized by its musicality, dramatic performances, and often stylized acting styles, serving as a vital medium for entertainment and the communication of social and cultural messages, particularly in rural and semi urban areas, but also increasingly in urban centers. In this episode of the Anti Library podcast, we will learn about the origins of Jatra, its remarkable adaptability throughout its history, adjusting to changing social dynamics and audience preferences, its cultural significance, fostering community engagement, education, and entertainment. From Dr. Jashodhara Sen. Dr. Sen is a performance historian as well as a practitioner specializing in South Asian theatre and performance. Dr. Sen completed her doctoral degree in theatre and performance studies at the University of Colorado Boulder and is currently an assistant professor of theatre and performance studies at the University of Florida. Her research interests lie in the intersection of politics and the history of liberatory performances across South Asia and the South Asian diaspora. Her current book project, titled Intersectionality in Folk Performance Through Identity and Expression, focuses on the culturally specific performance form Jatra and its many modalities and is centered on class and gender dynamics. Without further ado, let's go to Dr. Sen to hear more about Jatra. Professor Sen, welcome to the Anti Library podcast. Thanks
Hi.
for doing this interview with us.
Of course, thank you for this is such an honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So I will go with my first question. What is Jatra? I have watched some Jatra growing up because I grew up in rural West Midnapur. So
Hmm.
I attended some Jatra performances. I think I also did some amateur Jatra after the Pujo when there will be Jatras and so on. But for people who don't know the cultural context or to bring in some kind of history into it, what is Jatra?
Okay, that's a pretty loaded question. And because you're from Midnapur, you're already familiar with Jatra because this particular form, which is not a monolithic performance form, and it is not only from Bengal, it is pretty spread out to the nearby states, whether it's Bihar or Odisha or Assam. Jatra is a prominent performance form, and thus we can say confidently that Jatra is not a monolithic performance form. It is multimodal, it's multidimensional. It is a traditional performance form, which literally means a journey. Jatra means moving from point A to point B. So it designates a path, it designates moving forward. So Jatra incorporates a variety of traditional performances, styles, and it kind of different space configurations when Jatra emerged. And if I focus on Bengal's Jatra, specifically Bengali Jatra, and Bengali Jatra also happens in Bangladesh, which looks slightly different. Its formation differs from Jatra in West Bengal. And I am using Bengal kind of synonymously with West Bengal, Bengal. They are in my writing the same thing. So the spaces when Jatra emerged during Sri Chaitanya's time, it looked like a procession, right? Moving forward, looked like a procession to disseminate religious Vaishnava religious literacy. Okay. Over time, of course, we see through colonization, through more, intermingling with different styles of performances. In Bengal, we see Jatra configuration, stage configuration shifted from a procession to a three-sided thrust, and sometimes an auditorium style, like proscenium arch style space in which people are kind of distant from the performance itself. So Jatra can be both peshadar or apeshadar. Peshadar is professional, apeshadar is amateur. And just stylistically speaking, as you asked me, what is Jatra? Jatra is a traditional form of performance. It's a form of storytelling. It is a form of invitation for community building, building resilience through transmitting knowledge and through transmitting embodied knowledge. Of course, it's a performance form, and inviting its audience to understand the changes happening sociopolitically. Now, how Jatra performers are doing that? The methodological way or framework is dramatic, and sometimes it's probably larger than life, right? And it is hyperbolic, it is operatic. Music is a huge part of Jatra since its inception, to disseminate initially, like I said, religious literacy, and now to kind of share the subtext, what's happening socioculturally, sociopolitically. So those are really prominent tenets of Jatra. Jatra has symbols, symbolic characters. So all in all, this kind of some might call it because its hyperbolic nature, some might identify it as a melodramatic, and rightly so. It is melodramatic because melodrama is emotional, and Jatra wants to touch the emotional pulse of its audience. So Jatra professional troops, they predominantly travel from urban centers to the peri-urban or rural areas. And this kind of movement is also not one-dimensional. Therefore, it allows this kind of continuous exchange between different groups of people and different performance spaces. And because of its multimodality, because of its non-monolithic nature, Jatra, if somebody asks what is Jatra, there's no one definition, but I can describe Jatra the way I did.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So I do remember there are several, genre markers that jatras have. So Samajik Jatra Pala, which is
Yeah.
more social and talking about contemporary issues. And as you said, it has some sort of a association with Vaishnavite devotionalism. So Pauranik Jatra is extremely popular, that we see. So, and you say I really like the way you describe this kind of an underlying social commentary that
Mhm.
even though ostensibly it's about a mythical story or about some kind of a devotional narrative, there is an underlying kind of social commentary or underlying interlink with some contemporary issues that
Yeah.
is happening. And you also describe it as a form of community building.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that there are different like subcategories or genres of Jatra. You have historical Jatra that predominantly focuses on historical characters, right? So a Jatra about Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowla, right? So the contemporary audience, they are learning about this historical, true kind of historical events with certain dramatization. Um, and because, Jatra is uh, the kind of welcoming audience, but also separating them from the events on stage. That way you can compare Jatra's technique a little Brechtian, which has this kind of very specific estrangement techniques that, of course, emerged in Jatra before Brecht introduced them. So Jatra can be historical, can be social. Primarily, we see Jatra now as sociopolitical, sociocultural, that deals with the social and cultural kind of shift and also commenting on the socio-cultural zeitgeist of the time. And then we see Jatra, the mythological Jatra you're talking about, that is really, it's a genre bending structure in my research. What I noticed that mythological Jatra is, it's not performed everywhere. This form of Jatra is usually performed after maybe community worship or ritual presentation. For example, Sheetalamongol Pala, that tells the life of goddess Shitala, someone who cools somebody. Shitala, again, literally means the goddess who cools and protects the community from the epidemics. And Sheetalamongol Pala is often performed after the worship of goddess Shitala. Maybe in the morning there's the worship on the day of Shitala's, specifically designated for her worship. And then in the evening we see starts with kirtan, and then moves on to a performance in which everybody, all community members, regardless of their age, gender, social identity, they can come together and kind of experience the life of goddess Shitala and learn from it. So that particular mythological type of Jatra performances are somewhat differently staged. The configuration is slightly different from the written narratives we see. Sheetalamongol Pala is relying on oral tradition as well. So it's based on Sheetalamongol Kabbo, which is one of the many Bengali Mongol Kabbo categories. And Sheetalamongol Pala is really taking the ideas from Sheetalamongol Kabbo, the poetics of Sheetala Mongol. And then there's another particular type of Jatra that we see that started happening to disseminate political literacy. Once again, that's really political Jatra that can be identified as modern Jatra. We see in the urban areas that emerged in the 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of playwrights, somebody like Brojendra Kumar De, integrating politics and social commentary into Jatra. And then we see Utpal Dutt, who was a very prominent Bengali theater director and actor who migrated to Jatra and really claimed Jatra as a potent territory to communicate with the community. And when he is doing performances, Jatra, his propagandist Jatra really looked different, very politically charged, right? And now the kind of Jatra we experience, contemporary Jatra, mostly I'm talking about both amateur and professional performances, they are integrating sociopolitics. So there are different styles and genres of Jatra to play with. Now, if you were talking about urban Jatra, it has very structured way of telling stories. Maybe there are some moral commentary. There are a lot of symbolic characters, a lot of comedic characters coming up, and definitely because of Jatra's operatic nature, probably a lot of music is also integral to Jatra. No matter what the format is, Jatra is growing as a big industry. It is a platform for not just performers or technicians, but we also see it's a platform for the communities to kind of rely on their expertise and to showcase their expertise in whichever way possible. So it is becoming a cultural enterprise to disseminate cultural knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, the characters you mentioned, some of the characters I remember is one of the characters is Bibek,
Yeah.
who which kind of features a lot, and it literally, of course, means conscience. So, could you tell us a little bit about how these characters function, and some prominent characters that we see in Jatra?
Certainly, yeah. Thank you for that question because I wrote my dissertation kind of looking at Bibek's role in Jatra, and since then I've moved toward more looking at 21st century Jatra. But yes, Bibek, or the anthropomorphization of conscience on stage, used to be a really prominent figure in Jatra, a moral commentator within the play. However, Bibek's role is so significant. We see early on Bibek, and let me kind of correct myself. We know that since 1985, 86-ish, the character of Bibek has kind of resolved. We don't really know if we have Bibek anymore, which is also a philosophical inquiry. What happens when you don't have conscience on stage? However, we cannot be 100% certain about that because in certain rural areas, there might be a character, a Bibek character, which is, again, it's a conscience figure on stage. The Bibek is not necessarily a part of the story, but rather someone who steps in and out of the action of the play. And Bibek reflects on events, questions the character's decision, and then kind of establishes this deep bond between the characters and the audience and Bibek. So in and out of the action and directly addresses the audience. And by doing so, Bibek is bridging the gap between the audience and the action of the play, foreshadowing and also asking the audience to critically investigate what's happening on stage, which I think is just such a powerful political character. Now, Mukundo Dash during the colonial period was a Kirtonia. Kirtonia is somebody who is who sings Vaishnava Kirtan, right? And traveled across Bengal and played the Bibek character. And the Bibek character is, their vocal capacity is unparalleled because they are singing many, many songs. Now, when I speak with Jatra professionals now, I notice that the number of songs, it has reduced over time. But when we're talking about let's say, the early 20th century, there were Jatra incorporated many songs to kind of entice the audience to understand the events happening on stage. And Bibek is one of those characters who can really sing and number one, bridging the gap between the audience and the action on stage. Number two, also reaching that one audience who had no access to education. Because when you're singing, then you are, although it's symbolic, songs were symbolic, you can reach that one person who probably has no access to education, which means no reading capacity or not in our systematically, when we're looking at social hierarchy, is not part of the intelligent group because we all live in that kind of social hierarchical, group set. So through songs, the Bibek can really reach that one audience and directly interact with them while making sure that what that audience member is thinking is important because living in a community, we don't live in isolation, we live in a collective. So the decision in colonial period through Bibek, we see it's important what the collective thinks instead of what one person is thinking, because so the collective conscience, that Bibek became the conscience of the collective as well as the conscience of the individual. So that's the Bibek. And something interesting is, of course, the Bibek has a certain amount of androgeneity, although oftentimes played by a man. There was also an all Bibek character. And I came to know about this literally after writing my dissertation on Bibek, I was talking to Dr. Torun Kumar De, Brajendra Kumar De's son, and he told me that all Bibek is the other side of Bibek, doing the similar kind of action, but the all Bibek has this kind of negative conscience and having a conversation between the good and bad, this binary and positive and negative. Oh, wow, that's like, it's so much to think about because, again, this anthropomorphized image of one's conscience interacting with them. And that conscience is not always good. Sometimes it is negative. And I find it tremendously powerful. And we don't see it in any other form of performance. And it would not be ideal if we compare this Bibek character with Greek theater's the collective voice,
The chorus.
Chorus, thank you. Yes, yes, Greek theater's chorus, because yes, Bibek is doing something similar like the chorus, but also something very distinct, especially Bibek, because its intention is to, again, reach that audience who is dealing with their negative conscience. Now, this kind of turmoil between the positive, negative, good, bad, which side, which way do you lean on? So I think, yeah, the Bibek, as far as I know, in urban areas, we don't see Bibek on stage, but I'm hopeful that people are still performing this character, Bibek.
Absolutely. So I really find that fascinating how you talk about, thanks for clarifying the differences between the Bibek and the Greek chorus, because I was also thinking along those lines when you were describing how Bibek embodies the collective consciousness or kind of connects, mediates between the actors and the audience. And you already mentioned how Utpal Dutt, who is this famous actor in both theater and later in films, used Jatra as a potent medium. You already mentioned its melodramatic or operatic character and its relation to religious processions. So I find it fascinating how Jatra is so constitutively heterogeneous as a performance form, as a genre. So I'm especially intrigued about the interaction between Jatra and theater that happens starting from the 19th century. And Upal Datta is a fine example of that. But could you tell us a little bit more about the history of that interaction between Jatra and theater?
Well, that's a really, again, it's a good question. Yeah. The history of the interaction between theater and Jatra is, well, historically speaking, because of, okay, backtrack. Post-independence, post 1947, we see a sudden change in our sociocultural platform, not just in Calcutta, but around all the big metropolis, all the big cities in India, right? It's in Bombay, in Delhi, in Chennai, then Madras, and all these big places. And group of artists, intellectuals, and activists. Now we identify them as organizers or activists. I'm back then probably they were, again, artist collectives. They were part of the left's cultural wing, IPTA, Indian People's Theatre Association. They congregated and they realized the way we can reach more and more non-urban audience, or even to a certain degree urban audiences, to delve deep into the traditional forms of performances. And we see through that kind of inquiry different styles of performances emerged, whether we notice Badal Sarkar is doing certain kind of performance, the third theater. We also notice in different regions, we have significant in Delhi, significant artists and significant intellectuals are working through that time frame. And something happened in Calcutta because initially Utpal Dutt was part of that collective, later on separated himself from it. Utpal Dutt looked at Jatra and thought that Jatra could be a great way to bridge that gap between the urban and the rural. Now, it is, I would say, to a certain degree, not Utpal Dutt. Utpal Dutt did significantly, of course, as not just an intellectual, but also somebody who was genuinely interested and invested in transformation and initiating this kind of important conversation about politics and existence itself. Uh, he definitely influenced Jatra's style, but after Utpal Dutt, nobody was, in my understanding, really successful in urban Jatra and using Jatra as a tool, as a vehicle to share political knowledge. Because of Utpal Dutt's background as an intellectual academic artist and director, as an actor, and really trained through Euro-American or European styles, he incorporated them into his writing. I can think of Tiner Toloar, how explicitly political it is. But again, structurally speaking, it was very much like a Bengali theater style. Like Bengali theater, the existence of Bangla theater is proscenium. And if we can have different ideas about Jatra, but Jatra is non-proscenium at its core. Jatra is non-proscenium. Still, if you go see a performance, I recently saw Anil Chakraborty and Kakuli Chaudhury's joint venture, Shesh Dekha Holuna. I think that's the name of the play. I want to double check. Shesh Dekha Hoyni. Sorry, Shesh Dekha Hoyni. And what a fantastic work, right? I was sitting there for those 3.5 hours, speechless. However, when at the beginning of the show I watched, the audience were not settling down. And at some point in time, the performers stopped their dialogue and said, I cannot go on unless you stop. Can we do that in Bangla theater? We can't. We don't have that capacity. That's not the style of Bangla theater. But in Jatra, you can. I watched a performance a few years back in 2019 in which the audience were requesting the actor on stage to sing a song again because they were so touched by that song. They wanted to hear it again. So there are moments in which we see that Bengali theater and Jatra, they are pretty different from each other. And in terms of hierarchy, whether we want to accept it or not, Bengali theater has a very different repertoire, very different structure, which is quite influenced by Euro-American realism, naturalism. Whereas Jatra is informed by other forms of traditional and folk performances, one of which is Kirtan, which is a folk form of performance, and different forms of embodied martial arts-based performances, the larger-than-life embodiment of characters, the comedic characters they have, really, in terms of shaping them, in terms of the language they are speaking, it's so colloquial, and it's not geared towards, the intellectuals, quote unquote. Excuse me. So that way, probably historically, there was a moment when post-independence Jatra and Bengali theater, they came really close and they interacted with each other. But these two categories are distinctly different categories, and both have their own strength. But because I am more invested in Jatra, I think to interact and to have a critical conversation with people from all strata of the society, I think Jatra is really a place that fosters that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I really find this kind of amalgamation of critical commentary that you mentioned several times. You even compared it with the Brechtian theater. It's again and again breaking the wall between the audience and the performers. Audience is asking the performers to sing. That's so fascinating. And at the same time, so it's both deeply affective as well as quite critical. So my next question is, who are the performers of Jatra?
Ah,
Especially I know it can come from different walks, especially with amateur jatra, but typically um, in my, for instance, in my mama body,
yeah,
after Durga Puja, the entire village will come together for a jatra. So it would be exactly in between the end of Durga Puja and Kali Puja, somewhere in between. So it will also linger the kind of vibe of the festivity as people kind of practice the jatra, and then they're already kind of accepting certain things, etc., etc. So all these things are there.
yeah.
But in terms of professional jatra, more specifically, people who do it, what is the class, gender, and caste, and those kinds of social fabrics? Do they play a role in determining who the performance of jatra?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to r- really categorically say, okay, this is the class, gender, caste, most Jatra performers. I'll try my best because I did kind of statistical analysis of where are people coming from, and I realized they come from a variety, the wide range of backgrounds, right? Jatra performers. But there are some patterns, like you mentioned. Traditionally, most performers have been men. And for a long time, even female specific characters were played by men, male actors, um, though often with limitations or kind of social scrutiny, especially depending on the region and the nature of the performance. Some performances incorporated more men in drag. For example, Mongol Chondi or any kind of Mongol Kabbo specific mytho-religious performances, mostly now even we realize that male identifying actors are playing those specific characters or Sheetalamongol. Uh, in terms of class and caste, in urban areas, by the way, sorry, now, of course, things are rapidly shifting in Bengali society. So many people from various class and caste categories are and gender categories are choosing to be in Jatra. So in terms of class and caste, Jatra has been generally associated with working class and lower caste, but I cannot say it's typically associated. But we can't claim that that's the story now. Um, in terms of who is, I would turn this lens around and say, who are the primary audience of Jatra? And then we see it is very categorically people coming from working class, people who are often underrepresented. They are the primary audiences of Jatra because Jatra hasn't always had high status. So people from dominant castes are elite backgrounds. And when I say elite, I'm being very specific about academic elitism, right? They were less likely to take up those audience spaces as well as performance spaces. But if you interact with Jatra performers, which I've been doing for my research, a lot of ethnographic material and looking at what you all are doing, why I'm so excited to see where you go with your podcast because you're anti-library. And I'm not saying we need to turn around from the library, and I'm sure that's not the intention.
Yeah.
But my work, I'm really invested in um, the people. So all the conversation, not necessarily I would call them interviews, all the conversation I had so far with Jatra performers, they are intellectually rich without talking about the theory directly. They are theorizing their work and they are stunning with their articulation of what they do. And specifically, I would like to mention three people I spoke with, and I cannot thank them enough. Kakoli Chaudhuri, one of the best actors I have seen on stage with their energy, with their singing ability, and their intellect. Absolutely a powerhouse performer. Arnold Chakraborty, stunning to say the least. And then late Dr. Prabhat Kumar Das, who really helped me to synthesize my thoughts when I was writing my dissertation. He passed away recently. But what I learned from them as we were chatting, as we were asking questions to each other, is the people of Jatra, the people make Jatra possible, which is such a, such an important thing. You do theater, you do performances for the people, okay? And Jatra is the reciprocity. If you are doing performances for its audience, and audience, they are there to invest in Jatra. Especially we see that in amateur performances, right? Like you said, you have experienced it. So people, the audience have always been mixed audience. Cast, determining their cast, it's really not possible. Although in Bengal we can assume somebody's cast by their last name, but in Jatra, unless you're one-on-one talking to the audience, which can range anywhere between 500 to thousands of people. So it's unless they are disclosing their caste identity consciously, you won't know who is participating. But in especially community or amateur performances. But really the audience, they want Jatra, and that's why Jatra happens. And Jatra happens for its audience, and audience is there for Jatra. This relationship is so deep-rooted, no matter where they're coming from. And speaking of that, there's a very clear difference between amateur Jatra and professional Jatra. And based on whether it's amateur or professional, the audience might shift. As I am noticing now, now I started working on Jatra in 2016. It's almost been a decade. But now I'm seeing a lot of students, college students are interested in Jatra. Even when I'm teaching about Jatra, really the evolution, the history here, in the interest of time, we cannot speak a lot about the historical past. But when I am teaching Jatra, I see significant interest in my non-Indian audience or non-Indian students to investigate about Jatra because of its, on the one hand, potency and limitation. And this still Jatra is not stagnant. It's evolving, although it's a traditional form of performance. And with tradition, how we see traditions are evolving. Similarly, Jatra is evolving. Its audiences are evolving. Now, young people are interested to learn more about Jatra, not just Bengali, but non-Bengali people. Yeah, and professional troops, the actors come from various other professions. Some of them have background in writing. Some of them are performers. Some of them have more technical expertise. Recently, I spoke with a student from Ashutosh College, and he's looking at the mass communication element of Jatra and their research. That's why I said it's not a one way of looking at Jatra as a cultural enterprise, but rather all these people are also active audiences of Jatra and active members of Jatra. So Jatra's people are not just the performers. I am also a member of Jatra, although I am not a performer. And all of these people are really helping Jatra's cultural, sociopolitical sustenance. So I hope it's a long-winded answer, but I hope I address some of the key factors that you were interested in.
Absolutely. Thanks for weaving your own journey with Jatra while answering that question as well. I love it. Thank you so much, Professor Sen. এখানে আমি রেকর্ডিং বন্ধ করছি।
That's